Latino Employee Network at Thomson Reuters. We'd like to thank you for joining our first panel discussion of the year, Minority Identities in the U.S. Where do we go from here? We are joined by Maria Teresa Kumar, who's visiting us from Washington, D.C., and it will be moderated by Reuters producer Stephanie Brumsey. And we may have another panelist join, TBD. So after the panel, there will be time for some Q&A, and there are also refreshments in the back for some networking opportunities after that. So please stay with us, and we're Facebook Live right now. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Brumsey. I'm a producer here at Reuters. Been working here for the last 2 years or so. Have numerous years of experience in other locations. You don't need to know about that. What you want to know about is Maria Teresa Kumar. So
that's an amazing intro. No.
Maria Teresa is the CEO of Voto Latino. Fast Company calls her one of the most 100 creative minds in the business. Elle magazine named her one of the 10 most influential women in Washington, D.C., and Hispanic Business named her among the 100 most influential Latinos in America. She's a woman you want to know.
That's stressful, that intro, by the way. Sorry, how can we do it? No, it's beautiful. Thank you.
I'm just giving credit where it's due. So today we're having a panel spotlighting minority identities and demographics during a time that has been a little contentious for people of color here under the Trump administration. There's been numerous stories about minorities being targeted, something similar to the attack in Oregon recently that ended with 2 men dead, and just scatterings of protests and interesting events happening throughout the country. So we're going to jump into this. So, Maria, do you feel like perceptions of minority communities, either from within the community or from outside the community, have changed since the election?
I think that the tone that the president has drawn has all of a sudden allowed people from the fringes to come out, and basically because he has not come forth and brought down what's been happening. Most recently, you mentioned Oregon. It's almost like a silent understanding within the administration that what is happening in America is okay. And again, I want to emphasize it's a fringe because, again, the fact that the people that came to the defense of these 2 young Muslim girls were, one was a veteran. It was very much seeing what was happening was the wrong thing to do. It speaks to who we are, I believe, as a country, that the majority of us recognize the strength and the beauty that there is in diverse communities. And as we move forward in the future, that is what America is built for. I often like to say that we often forget that we have already been here in this moment in time, 100 years ago. 100 years ago, let's go back, America was going through an incredible transformation of its industry from agriculture to industrial. We had massive immigration, Ellis Island, we're in the backdrop of New York City. We also had the Great Depression and the Great War. And coming out of that, Americans decided that we were going to double down on ourselves. We were going to invest in the middle class. We were going to invest in ensuring that people became homeowners, got their education. We were going to invest in roads and infrastructure. We were going to lay down the fiber that later became the internet as we know it. Thank you, Facebook Live. But it was an understanding of that was what our possibility was. Everything I just described is what we're living today. And we have to recognize that as Americans, we have to make sure that we are participating and we are at a crossroads. Are we going to make sure that we're going to double down on ourselves for the future of America that does look different than 100 years ago? The millennial generation is larger than the baby boomers. Generation Z is larger than the millennials, and 50% of them are diverse. So this is the country we have. And so what we need from the administration, from the president, is we need leadership and help us lead and not back up from not only who we are as the country, but also back up from the global stage.
Okay, you led right into my second question, so thank you for that.
It wasn't on purpose, right?
I feel like it was, but I appreciate that. So you're saying that President Trump needs to lead in order for us to get ourselves out of this rut that we found ourselves in, this contentious time in America. But he hasn't quite spoken up about these events that's been happening across the country. How do you feel, or how do you think that Donald Trump is affecting these changes, these perceived changes within the minority community, whether through his actions or his inactions?
Silence means you're condoning something, not condemning. And just what happened yesterday, a few days in London, and the fact that he woke up this morning, decided that it was his right to go after a mayor who was struggling to put the world back together, his world back together again, is not only unacceptable, but we really need leadership in this country. And it's not just coming from the administration. We need bilateral support from the Republicans and the Democrats. We need Democrats to come and say that what's happening right now is bigger than just a party issue. And we need Republicans to come out and say this is bigger than a party issue. Because this is the very first time, I would say, that America is facing such difficulty in navigating who we are. And what I mean by that is that many of the immigrants that have fled broken systems. You can ask any immigrant in New York City, pluck them down and say why you're here, and they know what broken looks like because they fled it. And they also know what America's possibility is. That's why they came here and they've chosen to sacrifice. And I can share with you, I don't care if that person right now is at MIT, driving a cab, or swam across the Rio Grande. They're all immigrants who have the same DNA, and that means that they're entrepreneurs. What we accept through our immigrants are people that are young. We don't get the weak. We don't get the lazy. We get the strongest and the fittest and the brightest. And that is who we are fundamentally are as a country. And so the challenge with Donald Trump is that he seems to forget who our roots are. From the very beginning, America has been a country of immigrants. So right now he is trying to fight against our history. And our job is to remind them who we are, but more importantly, we need the Republicans and both the Democrats to come together. And that's why I think that a lot of the solutions that we're going to see are going to come from local communities and local cities. If you notice what happened just recently with the Paris Agreement that he pulled out, all of a sudden mayors across political spectrums decided that this is not who we were. They recognize what leadership looks like. And so we need to give the Republicans and the Democrats courage to recognize that, to rise above politics and recognize what's at stake.
Now, we're speaking about Trump and we're talking about politicians, but what about just normal people like you and I and our colleagues? Mm-hmm. What about how they respond to these perceived changes in the minority community, or do you feel that they are having a genuine response?
I have to say that we are definitely seeing a jobs program. I don't know if it's the one that the president intended, but we're seeing an incredible jobs program when it comes to progressive politics. We're seeing a jobs program when it comes to you, the media, and that is keeping people honest, and keeping people accountable, and keep people clear of what is happening in the country so that they can do something that's actionable. The work of Voto Latino, our hardest job is to get anybody in this room to pay attention. The president is helping us explain civic engagement, civic education, and what happens when people march. There is no doubt in my mind that the reason the courts struck down the ban on Muslims was because the media did their job and the American people did their job. They marched. They said, not on our watch. They collected in airports. And all of a sudden, the courts could not do this in quiet. And that's what the media was able to do. They were able to expose what was happening. And that is why the president, I'm sure, is frustrated, because he realizes that we do have checks and balances. My family left Colombia in the late 1970s. And in Colombia, it's considered, up to this date, it's been considered one of the strongest democracies outside of the United States. It's the second democracy in the Western Hemisphere. It didn't feel like that for a long time. It was a civil war that was never declared. I would go visit. In retrospect, I don't know why my mother would send her, oh, I do, but we won't get into that now. But she would send me to Bogota during the summers. And Bogota was a place that was very similar to Israel for a time. You would walk out and you weren't sure if you would come back in Bogota because there were bombs constantly going off. In in public places, whether it was the movie theater, whether it was going to school. It was just simple acts. But what kept Colombia standing as a democracy was that it had an incredibly strong media and a very strong judicial system. The two most important jobs that kept that country alive as a democracy, a semblance of a democracy, was journalists and judges. People trusted them. Everything else started deteriorating, but when it came to finally sign that agreement, the FARC came in because they could trust that journalists were going to tell the truth and that the judges were going to uphold the treaty. So your jobs have never been more important.
Wow. I was a little choked up there. Thank you. No, I totally agree with you. You answered like half my questions, but I'm not going to get into that right now. No, I totally agree with you. I feel as a journalist, I'm going to insert myself into this conversation because that's what it is. I feel as a journalist that it has that President Trump has changed the dynamic as a woman, as a person of color, as a journalist. The conversation has been different, and I myself have experienced different situations now as a representative of all of these factions. I was on the steps of the Capitol that fateful day when President Trump was inaugurated, and his supporters were not kind. I can't say the things that they said on Facebook Live. You can find me later, but the perception of the media that I've been receiving as of late is that we are fake news, right? And that the things that we are reporting are not factual, or they're liberal, they're leaning. All these things are not Reuters, but they're ineffectual. When speaking to people, my Facebook comments are constantly filled with people who want to fight me about what the media is or is not doing at this point. Do you feel that this constant concentration on President Trump and his policies and how they affect both the minorities, like the perception of the minorities and the view of how the media treats President Trump?
No, I think that you asked a terrific question. I think there's two things. If you were to ask me what was I personally think for this last election, we're learning all the wrong lessons. No, really, we're learning all the wrong lessons. The lessons that we're learning is that we have to focus on the disaffected Trump voter. When you actually look at who voted and who abstained from voting, the majority of people are not in agreement with what is currently happening in Washington, D.C. We know that 3 million people voted for a different candidate, but my question is not them. Who decided not to vote? And who would participate today? If you were to peel back the electoral map of 2017 and only account for the millennial voter, only 5 states went red. For the very first time, young white men did not vote for the Republican candidate. 10% of them voted left of center of the Democratic candidate. Something generationally is happening in this country. And something is being driven by young people, but we have to figure out how do we accept them and bring them into a system that they clearly have defined as broken. For the last 10 years, young people have led. First, it kicked off with the immigrant marches here in New York City. 2 million people marched for immigration. But after that, what that unleashed, you had young people marching for Occupy Wall Street. You had people marching for the environment, for gay rights. You had people marching for, most recently, Black Lives Matter. 10 years of marches culminated in what we just saw, but we didn't see it translate into something bigger. And I think that was why the Women's March was so important, because not only was it meaningful that it took place in Washington, D.C., there was not a state in the country, whether red or not, that people marched. And some of the deepest, reddest states. The conversation people like to say how many people congregated in Boston, hats off to Boston, but the fact that you had people in the Deep South, in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, the courage to come out and say this is not the country that I believe in, but this is the country that I see, not the one we just elected, gives me hope. The fact that people are still organizing and mobilizing gives me hope. And that is where I think that the difficulty between what's happening right now in the Trump administration and what's really happening at the local level is it's going to have to meet itself, right? Remind me your second question, because this is,
I kind of want to go off what you just said, right? Like, screw that one, right? Like, so.
Thank goodness this is Facebook Live, ladies and gentlemen.
This is a conversation, guys. Again, for those of you maybe just joining us on Facebook Live, because this is what we do on Facebook Live, this is Teresa Kumar. She's the CEO of Voto Latino, and we are discussing the minority identities and the demographics during the Trump era. Join in. So you had a really interesting point about millennials, voting left of center, millennials not agreeing with the practices that politicians are trying to put into place, whether it become like bills or healthcare, women marching, Black Lives Matter marching, Latinos marching, people taking over airports. I don't know if anybody's told you, but the politicians don't seem to be listening, right? Right? It's a big response, right? But recent bills and laws are trying to be put forth by, politicians, whether it is the travel ban or whatever, this extreme vetting, whatever you would like to call it, or the new health care to repeal and replace Obamacare, or, any number of things. It seems to be that the politicians aren't listening to their constituents, right? So what can these minorities, and minorities include people of color, they include sexual orientation, it includes women. What can these minorities do to be heard, even though they seem to be screaming the loudest at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think it's one, first of all, it's finding allies. Two, I would say that the first 120 days, or give or take a little bit, or a little more now, the Republicans that are in Congress and the Senate were trying to identify whether or not they should be listening to the leader in the White House. And so I think a lot of them gave the president a lot of leash. What they're seeing, though, when they go back to their town halls and they're organizing, they're realizing that what they are voting for sometimes is at odds. One of the reasons why they saw the healthcare reform, they did it quickly without a CBO, Congressional Budget Office, actually scoring it, is because they knew that if they did, their constituencies would be up in arms. If you're to ask me what is next after marching, we have to make sure that we're going to town halls. Because right now, when you see the town halls, you don't see young people, and you definitely don't see people of color. But the town halls is where members of Congress, both Democrats and both Republicans, are finding their spine. If you watch in the last couple of conversations that you've had with different senators, they'll say that they believe in President Trump, but they don't necessarily espouse the way he delivers his message and all of his policies. That means they're trying to figure out how to break away from the president. Our job as Americans is to make sure that we are, one, reporting on it, and two, providing people with the easiest access to participate. I can share with you the idea of going to town halls for communities of color is something that is mostly new. It's not something that is historically done. We need to learn how to do it, and we need to learn how to do it quickly. Then we also have elections, municipal elections. So the bench that was built by the congressional members was built starting around 2009, 2010, right after the census. They saw the numbers, they saw the census, and they started building a political bench that started from the school board, that fed into city council, that fed into the state house, that fed into members of Congress. Our job is to make sure that we are electing leaders that reflect us. When people say that a lot of folks don't care, the average age of a U.S. senator is a 64, 65-year-old white man. Yeah. So what that means is that 64-year-old white man, when he goes home for Christmas, his grandchildren are in their 20s. They're not even in the classroom with what American kids look like today. They don't have a clue. The way you change that is to have people run for office who do.
Okay, and thinking along those lines, following that chain of thought, how do we, you can say run for office. You can say go to town halls, right? But there's a there's almost a cognitive dissonance when it comes to minority communities as a whole, right? Being educated about it, about the topics, about when elections are, and who their candidates are, or even how to run for office, and a lot of millennials feel that they feel and are a little too young, a little too broke, and a little too unconnected. I mean, I'm just speaking from
so
a level.
I love millennials. You guys aren't young anymore. I hate to break it to you. You guys are now entering the ripe old age of 36. You could all run for president if you choose to. We're the ones that we
millennial. I am not yet 30.
But I'm telling you, like, so what's the generation? No, but the generation. So Generation Z, for the very first time, voted this year.
That's disturbing.
There you go. So what I'm sharing with you is that we have to step up into the leadership. We are the leaders we choose.
Okay.
This idea, I do want to emphasize. I completely agree with you. I think that there is too much money in politics, and we have to figure out how we choose the best candidate who has our issues, not the one who can outraise the next one. That we have to redefine. Besides that, if you say you're too young. So the work that I do, I will share with you. The work that I do, we started focusing on young Latinos because I recognize that young Latinos, immigrants, children of first-generation immigrants, are helping make household decisions long before they're turning 18 years old. They are helping their parents navigate doctor's office. They're helping sign leases. They are helping, and sometimes not fairly, translate for the teacher-parent conferences. I admit I'm one of those, obviously. And so these young people have an incredible burden already on their shoulders, and that is to play adults long before they turn 18. They're being responsible. I think that when you look at some of our greatest leaders, they have been young, and there is a power of not knowing limitation, of not knowing what you're not supposed to do. There's an authenticity, and I think that we are going to see that leadership rise. I'm on the board of Emily's List. Last year, the board, we could barely get 200 women to come in and say that they want to run for office. This year, we have over 14,000 women. That's a great problem to have. But it can't be just them. We need young people. There's an organization called Vote, Run, Lead that's trying to focus on millennials. But there is a matter of making sure that we're choosing and identifying our peers and holding them accountable. And you're right, they do absolutely need training. I think that there are different ways now to finance a campaign that was not available even 4 or 5 years ago. President Obama really broke that. Bernie Sanders showed that you can run a presidential campaign for $27. So there are other, I think that we have to, it gets to a point when we are trying to identify what is the country we want to live in, where we actually can't afford excuses. And right now our country cannot afford excuses. We need leaders that basically buck up and say, this is the country I live in, this is my community, whether it's your school board and that pothole that you want to fix because you're city council, or it's because all of a sudden you're seeing an injustice. And the country's craving it. I was in, so I grew up in a very rural community. I grew up in Sonoma, California. And about 2 weekends ago, I went to see Garrison Keillor. How many folks know Garrison Keillor? So you, me, and my husband, which is why I married him. He grew up in rural Jersey. No one else. My husband and I were in the audience. It was a double date with my in-laws. And the funny thing is that he kept referring to college students. I think we were the youngest in the audience. But the beauty about Garrison Keillor was it was a show in D.C. And he started feeling that the audience needed something, and so he started singing patriotic hymns. During intermission, he raised the lights and said, again, I think the average age in that room was probably in its mid-70s. They could have all used a bathroom break. And instead, he's like, for those who want to, go ahead, but we're gonna continue singing. This is Washington, D.C. Everybody stood and started singing.
Yeah.
And holding hands and arms, and it was like a moment where this country, I think it was reflective of this country. It was a revival of sorts, but it's a recognition from the larger group of us, recognizing that something is a foul, and we don't know which north to go to, and that's why we need young leaders to run for office.
Okay, I have numerous things I want to go through. It's just like, oh gosh. Okay, let's tear this apart a little bit.
Please do.
Okay, I know, right? This is my job. All right, so first off, you mentioned Bernie Sanders, right? Everybody felt the burn for a little while, and so you didn't.
I never liked that.
No?
I never liked that.
Feel the burn?
Yeah, it's just,
My
It was
friend
just
made
terrible.
odd jokes about it. But
so I was in LA during the campaign, and it was literally a campaign. Feel the burn. It was an STD ad.
and that's exactly the joke that my friends
because that is because this is Facebook Live. It was literally a billboard in LA.
I love it. Well, it's interesting. And he caught people's attention, right? Yes. Now, he caught people's attention. It was a national movement full of millennials who were on the ground, papering locations, speaking out to people, raising money that they didn't have to pay their student loans, just really going for it because they believed in this candidate. And that candidate, for lack of better words, lost to Hillary as far as being a representative from the Democratic Party. And then Hillary then lost to Donald. Now you can analyze that a million different ways, but the thought process I want to follow here is Bernie is an independent, right? Like he's been an independent all his life. He's very, very, very left.
Sometimes because he doesn't believe that contraception, a woman's right to choose, is actually an issue. So we'll go.
He is an old white man.
That's not the reason, but
I'm gonna just give him that one. Let's talk about that later, Bernie. But for many young Americans, he was the choice. But he didn't make it, right? The political system that is in place now, our two-party system, is there room for a candidate like Bernie? Or maybe a moderate conservative, right, who can represent the millennial needs and wants and make it to the national stage and possibly win titles such as congressman, senator, president. Is there a place for that person?
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, first of all, it wouldn't be the first time that our country saw party transformation where one party basically rose and basically passed away. Now, which party is that? I couldn't tell you because I can share with you that what's happening in Washington right now among Republicans, they can't identify for the most part with the current president, with who should be their leader, right? And then with the Democratic Party, they're trying to figure out how progressive should they go without losing their moderates.
Right.
And so I think that it's going to be a challenge, but and that part of that challenge is the infrastructure of the way it's built. The way that majority of folks end up funding is through party apparatus. The way you get on a slate at the local level is through party apparatus. So there's a lot of changes that would have to happen systemically at the local level in order for it to be transformational. But I do say this. For those folks that decided to abstain or decided to vote third party, you made the country swallow a very bitter pill. Because what is happening right now in this country, and I said it from the moment he announced, I actually said that he was not part of the sandbox that the rest of the two-party system lives. And while many people that went to bed and voted for change, the majority of people of color on November 9th felt unsafe. They woke up to a very different country. And I can share with you that in Voto Latino, we went from providing voter registration and voting booth, voting booth protection, electoral protection at the booth, information 1-800 numbers. Basically, if you had problems at the voting booth, you call this 1-800 number. We went from that on November 8th to November 9th. We have a social digital center, listening center, which basically tells us what's popping. And it was suicide prevention hotlines that we started providing. We had to work with the administration and come up with a toolkit that we just started disseminating. Why? Because we had 760,000 DACA students that had trusted the government with their federal information, and now they felt exposed, not just for themselves, but their family members. It was a very different reality. And when people ask me what went wrong in the campaign, I say that there was a lot of incompetence. We were registering voters in Texas at rock bottom prices. You don't need to know the details, but it was because it was an appetite. People knew in Texas that their life was about to change to appreciate it, Texas has the lowest participation in the country. And all of a sudden, they were one of the very few where the electoral base moved. It was because they knew that their moment, they were going to have a very different experience. And I think that the concern for communities of color is that the agency that this president has unleashed on everyday people, on how they can react and interact with fellow Americans, is a slippery slope. Putting that genie back in the bottle is not going to be easy.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, some of these events that happened throughout the country harken back to the civil rights era, like
before.
Before that, it's just, it's unreal, right? I was actually at a Voto Latino location in Miami on Election Day. I was at several, actually. We were covering the Latino vote in Miami. I was with my then colleague, Luciana Lopez, and we were speaking to voters, trying to get the feel for it, and several things occurred to us while we were working. So first of all, here we are in Miami. You've been to Miami, right? So here we are in Miami. It's Election Day, an historic Election Day, and we couldn't find two voters to rub together at any voting location. And it had gotten to the point where, and these are not rural voting locations. It had gotten to the point where the population there had basically cannibalized itself voting early. And so nobody was out on Election Day. And the population there was so, I don't even know how to explain it. They were so, they conflicted. Right? So you had these very conservative Cubans who mostly voted Trump. And then you had these really young millennials, sometimes children of these Cuban immigrants or refugees, rather, or, anybody else who lived there who might be voting Clinton. No one was present, right? And at the end of the night, when it became clear that Trump was going to win, we made our way back over to Little Havana, and they were celebrating in the streets, like stopping traffic, cars decked out in Trump signs, honking horns, waving Cuban flags and American flags, and we spoke to them about why Trump, why this, and it was their ideals. They said, the cognitive dissonance was amazing. It was the statements, and you can probably find them on my Twitter feed somewhere. I can send them to you if you want to see this, because it was really interesting. The statements ranged from, I came here in a raft overnight, and I came here for freedom, and I'm voting for Trump because he's going to be hard on immigration, and then all of these illegal immigrants who are coming and stealing our jobs, which I was just like, but you came in a raft, sir. And it wasn't even a sarcastic thing. Like, that was my next question. Like, sir, you came in a raft? Like, first, wait, how? But then, like, beyond, like, the sheer, like, what? It was a question of, wait, what? And then, and the stories went from there. There was another man who said they came over in a stolen airplane. I had many questions. None of them got answered. But he also said something along the lines about illegal immigration. We spoke to Cuban women about, his comments about grabbing certain body parts. And she said, well, he can grab whatever he wants as long as he fixes this country. What do we do when minority communities hold ideals that supersede the potential treatment that they might receive underneath an administration?
Yeah, I think that actually, well, it's two thoughts. One, I think that there was definitely a generational divide. Young people had espoused very different views, but I also think that it was understanding the experience of folks that were not in safe spaces. Miami is very much a safe space for Latinos, right? My grandmother loves, she lives in Bogota, but she loves visiting the family in Miami because the front doors say, we speak English, right? We speak Spanish. So it's a very safe space. And so when you do not feel that you are under attack, that your life is going to be as business as usual, you have a tendency of perhaps being more lenient against what was clearly going to be policy steps. That's all I can say. That said, we saw in Georgia, where we did some work, we saw 144% increase in early voting by Latinos. 144% increase. They only represent 4% of the electoral base, but they represent 13% of the classrooms. Those parents were going out in the best way that they could to protect their families. To me, that's a 911, especially from a community that does not vote early. This was a change. I think that if you were to talk to many of the same people that were rallying around the flag then, I think a lot of them would be surprised at what we're seeing. I do not believe that what is happening, and I cannot say it enough, what's happening right now in the White House is along any sort of political spectrum that this country is aware of, has experienced. And I think that it's important for us to not only keep ourselves honest, but keep ourselves very factual. I don't know how many folks saw the White House Correspondents' Dinner where the comedian spoke, but he said it best. He said, your role now as media is to be perfect. You cannot make mistakes. We cannot allow for mistakes to happen. And then he very funny said, and now you know, welcome, now you know what it feels to be in a minority. And then he took that back too. But it's true, and I think it's because the stakes are so high. Because with any little bit of infraction, people are going to take that, going to try to take your legitimacy away. And that cannot happen. And again, for the folks that were rooting in the streets, I just find it really ironic because he first of all, the president always told us who he was from the very beginning. None of this should be a surprise to anyone. And for someone to basically scream out in the streets just after they know who they are and after they fled Castro's regime, it's more than mildly shocking.
Okay, so where do I go from there? So in that case, right, in the case of people who may vote counter to their safety, in the case of older and younger Americans, minorities, women, people of color, sexuality, where can you begin, right? Like if you don't even know how to ask the question, right? Like let's say you don't know how to ask the question, and I'm making you my mother in a sense, right? And I do.
Okay.
You're not old enough to be my mama.
Thank you.
You can be my older sister.
There we go.
You make my older sister, right? And you don't know where to begin, but I do, right? How much of this is reliant on, maybe the younger generation educating these people, and then like, is it, and more importantly, right, is it their job to?
I mean, I think first of all, we all have social responsibility. So if you're going to see someone jumping off the ledge, you'd want to tell them, don't do it. And I actually think that the way we gather information are actually very, very different if you're coming from the African American community, for example, than if you're coming from a recently arrived community. The African American community, the older generation, has an active understanding of how the system works. They know how to participate. They are present. And young people within the African American community need to learn from their elders. And so we have to figure out how do we set up those conversations. The young people in the Latino and immigrant communities, for the most part, have no idea how the system works, but simply because they speak English, the parents expect them to understand. And so we need, and just to give you pause, but Generation Z, I keep saying, is larger than the millennial or baby boomer generation. They're the last white majority generation. So as a country, we have basically 25 years to figure out how do we do a massive transfer of knowledge of every sector in this country, whether it is how our government works, whether it is how prime journalism works, whether it is how Wall Street works, Silicon Valley works, Hollywood. We need to actually have a nation-building agenda for a massive transfer of power to a generation that for the most part are going to be first, second generation immigrants who do not know how the systems and the levers of government work or power. But that's for another Facebook Live.
Yes.
But that said, we need to make sure that we're sharing knowledge. And when people say, well, you know, if I call my congressman, that does not make a difference. I can tell you that I used to be a congressional staffer. It makes a difference. Tweeting is fantastic. We are a digital organization. I love it. But calling them off the hook drives them bananas. It's like almost like psychological warfare. So call them, be persistent, insist on the government that you want, and let them know that you're paying attention. Because right now, the only time that they're finding spine is when they go home and they see tons of people all of a sudden in their town halls. The fact that they are shy and want to cancel them. There's a new organization. It's called townhallproject.com. Check it out. It basically lists all the town halls that your members of Congress and the Senate and your municipalities are hosting, so you can go fill it. There's nothing that should not be transparent about our government. That's what makes us unique. And it's the moment that people get calloused, the moment people say this is too hard, or this is too much. That's a strategy as well. Don't let them tucker you out, because it took us 250 years plus to get to this great country. We're not perfect, but we actually have a blueprint that's pretty amazing. People often ask me, well, you know, there are other countries that could be pretty amazing. You know, Sweden, Germany, Finland, and I have to pause them, because while they may be amazing, my kids, me, you, a lot of folks in this room, we could not be Swedish.
No.
Right? Like that like the community is not built for that.
Right.
In America, we are American the moment we set soil. That is what makes us special. And that is what makes us, again,
Country of immigrants.
And we are a country. And so the moment that we abdicate that, the moment that we actually pull back and actually allow for less of favors, not expecting equal playing board, not only do we individually lose, but the country loses. And that is a strategy.
Okay, this leads me to my last question before my Q&A. I'm sorry, I'm an inquisitive person.
I thought that was the last one. I was, man,
no, that was like a really good one. But like this one's gonna be better because I feel like you're all passionate and stuff. And so what you just described is an aspect of the community that isn't quite getting the attention that it needs.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. Tell me what other aspects like need attention. What can we do? Right. Besides the massive transfer of knowledge, right? Like someone needs to just sit down and write down everything that lives in Al Sharpton's head. Besides that, right?
He would be happy to have that conversation.
He would love to. He would just sit down. What do you want me to say? But besides this massive transfer of knowledge, right? What else? What other aspects are we missing in our communities? And this is just, and like I said, and like I keep trying to emphasize, not just, you know, people of color. I'm talking like sexuality here. I'm talking, I'm talking women, right? Like what are we missing? What did the women's movement do that we aren't doing anymore? What did the LGBT movement do way out in California, right? That we aren't doing anymore, that we aren't incorporating, right? Because it seems like marches aren't helping all the time.
No, I mean, I think the marches are the start. Again, it's harder to march than to vote, right? To physically come out into the street, to expose yourself, to say that I am a witness to what's happening and I'm not going to, that takes strength and that takes courage. The next step is participation. But I do think what is missing is that we are overemphasizing the Trump voter, number one. So there's a lot of coverage on the Trump voter. We're missing what's actually happening at the local level in these communities. I'll go a little bit deeper in that. And I also think that the president often does a bait and switch. So he says, look at me here. But in the meantime, there's 13 municipalities around the country that have outlawed protesting. 13. We should be covering that. The fact that they are now trying to ensure that they're rolling back the Voting Rights Act, we should cover that. When you hear that African Americans went soft on this president when it came to voting day, the follow-up question is like, yeah, but 900 voting booths went missing because of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. This was the first election without protection. 200 in North Carolina alone. That's infrastructure. We should be covering that. When we're talking about this idea of choice, we should be covering every single clinic that's trying to eliminate and close down Planned Parenthood. the conversations right now, someone else could be covered. Russia's absolutely important, but I would tell you that that is a bait and switch, because what is happening right now in our communities, it's to enfranchise the young and the people of color, and it's on purpose. So I would say take a very close look at what Sessions is doing, take a very close look at what Kelly is doing at Homeland Security, and take a very close look at what's happening on education, because they want to privatize that too, and take a very close look at what's happening with the EPA, because all of that we actually have a hand in.
I mean, if it's any consolation, right? I mean, we do cover that. I mean, I'm not going to say we cover it. I'm not going to say, I mean, as a member of the media, I feel the need to defend myself.
No,
right?
but I think the challenge, the sexy story is what the latest tweet was. And what I'm sharing with you is that that we're falling into a trap. We're falling into a trap by covering that.
I think on multiple levels, right? Like, I can't speak for all outlets, right? And one of my jobs is to get up and read several newspapers in the morning and listen to NPR and do a bunch of research before I come in, because I need to know what I'm talking about. And I can't say that the stories aren't there. Everything that you've said, A, you heard about it somewhere, right? And that means someone somewhere is reporting it, right? B, it's not that we're focusing on Russia, it's that the 24-hour news cycle focuses on Russia. It's a massive story. And it's going to be the threat that truly begins to pull apart the administration if it starts to fall apart, right? People...
So I guess what I'm sharing with you is that there are more actors than the president, and we have to figure out how do we start recognizing who those actors are in a way that they are. So it's almost seen as a band of folks together. Because right now, I do not disagree that the Russia story is the hottest story, perhaps the most important story. But while all the focus is here, there's a bait and switch going on that's disproportionately going to disenfranchise us if we're not paying attention.
No, most definitely, most definitely. I mean, I think personally, those are the things I tell my mom to do. Like, pay attention to your local paper, right? I mean, I cover national news, right? So, you know, I sit down, I'm like, you need to, who's your local congressperson, right? I sit down, where I get my hair done, like all of this. My local congresswoman goes to my hair salon, and I quite often end up having conversations off the record while we're sitting underneath hair dryers, right? And which is why it's off the record. It's like, what did you say? And it's just a matter of, like, getting out and being educated about what's going on in your community. I totally agree with you that there are things happening in this country that people aren't paying attention to. The meetings that Betsy DeVos, not the meetings, the hearings that she's having on the budgets, the fact that, you know, out of the numerous jobs, out of the U.S. attorney generals that were fired, only one has been replaced out of 47, and that doesn't include the 47 that quit before that, right? That's a lot of empty space in the Department of Justice. These things are happening. I think that in addition to it not being in necessarily the forefront of the 24-hour news cycle, I think that people aren't necessarily looking for the story because Russia is sexy, right? Like, everybody wants to be a Russian spy, and now they don't, right? So you have this idea of this massive story, and how do you get people to pay attention to the bait and switch? You know, to be looking for the pebble that's underneath the other cup.
Well, I mean, I think that it's big. So one of my favorite folks that covers election, pardon? Yes, why? Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think it's we have to be like a dog with a bone, and we have to recognize again that while we laugh and, you know, sometimes are concerned with the president's actions, he actually has a group of folks that know how government works. And I think that some people think it's incompetence, but I think that when you start losing institutional knowledge across agencies, that too is a strategy. And so those are things, again, less sexy. But, you know, I would look at some journalists that have been able to really break things. It's sometimes things that seem like a thread, they don't seem to make a connection, but when you start connecting the dots, that's the story. And whatever happens with Russia, we have to be alert and present of what's happening within our borders. And I do think that one is, again, covering the non-sexy, but connecting the dots, because it is all spun together. And There are, I would say the actors that are complicit within the congressional members, and there are folks surrounding him that are complicit because, again, they see what else is going. They're basically they're abating it because of the interest that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not going to get too much into it.
So you were talking about other aspects that we're ignoring. You can finish that up with your speech, but I interrupted you.
Oh no! But I think that's it. I think that there are, while we keep looking at what's happening with the pulling out of the, so even Paris, the climate change, pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, including myself, I tweeted about how that's terrible. We're basically abdicating leadership on a global scale. But that's 4 years from now. What happened yesterday? Most of Washington definitely doesn't know what happened yesterday. At the local level, that's going to impact future elections. That's going to impact future access to education, small business. The fact that they eliminated loans for small minority business owners, the fastest purveyors of small businesses are Latinas. It's personal. The fact that they want to privatize our children's education,
So indoctrinate our future children.
it's personal, right? This is all. I mean, we have. If we can't figure out what the writing's on the wall. I mean, and this is not to scare folks. This is like we have to take action. You guys are the smartest people. You guys are educated. You have networks. You know how it works. And that's why your journalism, the work that you do, I actually think that the future is bright because we have access, we have networks on our side. When people try to call you all the fake media, it's a small circle. And we just found out that 5 or 6 million of his followers are bots.
Yeah.
That's awesome, guys. Right? Like, don't believe the hype. The majority of Americans are not on that side. And our job, your job, is to connect the dots for them.
Peel back the onion.
Pardon?
Peel back the onion one layer.
Yeah, right? And they're hungry for it. Like I said, like this moment in Garrison Keillor, you had a whole bunch of older white Americans in the middle of a theater singing. I would never have guessed it. I wasn't with my people of color people. I was like, saying they want community, they want leadership, and they are looking for direction. And so in the media it is, run for office. Make sure that you're getting your friends registered. Give them the facts. Give them a ride to the polls. There's infrastructure pieces that are trying to hold people back. We have to make sure that we're present for them. At Voto Latino, one of the things that we've decided to do is that we decided to make Hispanic Heritage Month of Action the first Sunday of that, a day for volunteerism. Because people are trying to tell us that we don't give back. But imagine if we got all the affinity groups of different corporations with their employees and our allies came out and actually gave a day of service. I'm all about putting people money where their mouth is and putting them in their place. We invented this. Listen to me. The internet's like Al Gore. We invented an app. No, we created an app called Voter Pal. You can download it, and now all of a sudden, all of you guys can start registering your friends and family, because the numbers are on our side. But we need to make it accessible, and we need to start folks running for office. And if people say, "Well, I don't have enough money," or "I'm not ready," or you know what, this is going to happen with or without you, and we need all of us. No pressure.
I think that was a good ending. So, yes, girl, yes. So I understand there's a question and answer portion of the